Family loyalty is a beautiful lie designed to keep you anchored to a sinking ship. I learned the hard way that your own parents will gladly let you drown just to protect their golden child. I'm Chloe, and this is my revenge. Please like, share, and subscribe for more. If you looked at a photograph of the Ted family from the outside, you would see the picture of suburban Denver perfection. My father, Hana, was a self-made man who built Ted Logistics from a single delivery truck into a multi-million-dollar regional supply chain empire. My mother, Beatrice, was a socialite whose entire self-worth was meticulously pinned to her country club status and her children's achievements. But beneath the veneer of expensive dental work and tailored cashmere lay a deeply toxic foundation, one built entirely around my older brother, Declan. Declan was the golden child. He was 3 years older than me, possessed a disarming, movie star smile, and had a silver tongue that could talk a starving dog off a meat truck. He was also a pathological liar. Growing up, the rules for Declan and me were vastly different. If I brought home a B+ on a report card, I was subjected to a 2-hour lecture from my father about mediocrity. When Declan wrecked my father's pristine, restored 1967 Mustang while driving drunk at 19, my mother tearfully defended him, claiming the suspension was faulty and that the poor boy is already traumatized enough. There were no consequences. There never were. The most chilling incident from our childhood happened when I was 16. My mother's diamond tennis bracelet went missing. Declan had taken it. I had physically seen him slipping it into his jacket pocket before heading out to a weekend party. When I told my parents, Declan effortlessly flipped the script. He cried. He actually produced real, streaming tears, claiming I was trying to frame him because I was jealous of the attention he received. He then suggested that Maria, our housekeeper of 8 years, had been looking at the jewelry box earlier that week. My parents fired Maria the very next morning and grounded me for a month for maliciously lying about my brother. I watched Declan buy a brand new motorcycle 3 weeks later. I learned then that my truth would never be a match for his fiction. Years later, against my better judgment, I let myself be pulled into the family business. I had moved to Chicago, earned my CPA, and built a respectable career at a top-tier accounting firm. I was happily married to Liam, a structural engineer whose quiet, steady honesty was the perfect antidote to my family's chaos. But when my father's health took a slight dip, the guilt trips began. "We need someone we can trust handling the finances, Chloe," my father had pleaded over the phone. "Declan is brilliant at sales, but he doesn't have your head for numbers. It's a family legacy. Come home." So I did. I packed up my life, moved back to Denver, and took over as Chief Financial Officer of Ted Logistics. Declan, naturally, was the Vice President of Sales, a title that came with a corner office, an exorbitant expense account, and very little actual oversight. For the first 2 years, things were manageable. I kept my head down, streamlined our accounting software, and tried to ignore the fact that Declan expensed luxury steakhouse dinners 3 times a week. But then came the third quarter of 2025. I was working late on a rainy Tuesday evening, running a routine audit on our vendor payouts. I loved the quiet of the office after hours, just the hum of the HVAC and the soft glow of my dual monitors. As I cross-referenced our quarterly expenditures, a discrepancy caught my eye. A series of payments had been made to a logistics consultancy firm called Blackwood Solutions. Over the course of 6 months, exactly $145,000 had been funneled to this vendor in irregular increments. I frowned, pulling up our vendor database. There was no physical address listed for Blackwood Solutions, just a P.O. box in Delaware. There were no attached deliverables, no project scopes, and no corresponding email threads in our internal server. The authorization signature on every single invoice belonged to Declan. My stomach tightened. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps it was a new lead generation service he was testing out. But the accountant in me felt a cold, creeping dread. I dug deeper, tracing the routing numbers on the cleared checks. The receiving bank was a small, independent branch in the Cayman Islands. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours sitting at my dining room table, drinking terrible instant coffee, while Liam slept in the next room. I pulled every single financial record tied to Declan's department. What I found was a sprawling, terrifying web. Blackwood Solutions wasn't the only ghost account. There was Apex Freight Coordination and Summit Regional Partners. Over the span of 18 months, my brother had systematically siphoned nearly $400,000 out of our family's company. He was stealing from our parents. He was stealing from my inheritance. And as the CFO whose name was on the tax returns, he was setting me up to take the fall if the IRS ever came knocking. I compiled everything into a thick, undeniable red binder. Bank statements, IP logs, forged vendor approvals. It was watertight. It was the truth. But I had forgotten the cardinal rule of the Ted family. The truth doesn't matter if it makes Declan look bad. I decided to confront my parents privately before going to the authorities or bringing it up at the office. I wanted to give my father the respect of handling it as a family first. The perfect, or rather most tragic, opportunity presented itself that Sunday. My mother hosted a family dinner every first Sunday of the month. It was an elaborate affair, complete with her prized silver cutlery and an overly dry roast beef. Liam and I arrived early. Declan arrived 20 minutes late with his wife, Sarah. Sarah always looked like a frightened bird, her eyes darting nervously around the room, a stark contrast to Declan's booming, magnetic presence. He walked in, holding a bottle of expensive Bordeaux, kissing my mother on the cheek and slapping my father on the back. "Business is booming, Dad," Declan announced loudly as he poured the wine. "Locked in the Harrison account on Friday. We're going to need a bigger fleet by next spring." My father beamed, his chest puffing out with pride. "That's my boy. Knew you had the killer instinct for this." I felt physically sick. I waited until the plates were cleared and my mother was pouring coffee before I made my move. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out the heavy red binder, and placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany dining table. The dull thud silenced the room. "What's this, sweetheart?" my father asked, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Dad." "Mom," I started, my voice trembling slightly before I forced it into an authoritative professional register. "I've been doing the Q3 audits. I found some catastrophic irregularities in our outgoing vendor payments. Money is hemorrhaging from the company." Declan stopped sipping his wine. His eyes, usually so warm and inviting, snapped to me with a sudden, predatory sharpness. "Irregularities?" My father frowned, reaching for his reading glasses. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are 3 phantom LLCs set up to receive payments for services that don't exist," I said, looking directly at my brother. "And every single invoice was authorized by Declan. Over the last year and a half, Declan has stolen $400,000 from Ted Logistics." Silence descended on the room like a suffocating blanket. Sarah gasped, dropping her spoon against her saucer with a loud clatter. My mother's face drained of color. My father slowly opened the binder, his eyes scanning the highlighted bank statements and the P.O. box registrations. For a fleeting, triumphant second, I thought I had finally broken the spell. I thought they finally saw him for the monster he was. Then Declan laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a rich, deep, condescending chuckle. He slowly shook his head, looking at our parents with an expression of profound pity. "Chloe, Chloe, Chloe," Declan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I knew you were stressed, but I didn't think you would stoop to this. Dad, don't bother reading that garbage." "Declan, your signature is on the wire transfers," I snapped, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The money went to offshore accounts." "Oh, the money moved, all right," Declan said, his voice hardening. He reached into his sleek leather jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the binder. "But it wasn't me who authorized it." My father opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails. I watched my father's face contort from confusion to absolute, blistering rage. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice dangerously low. "I caught her last week," Declan said, his voice dripping with fabricated sorrow. "I noticed the discrepancies too, Dad. I had an external IT guy look into the server logs. Chloe used my digital signature to approve those invoices. And worse?" Declan paused, looking at Liam with fake sympathy. "She's been funneling the money to cover Liam's underground sports betting debts. I was trying to figure out how to tell you guys without destroying her marriage." "What?" Liam shouted, half standing from his chair. "I don't even watch sports. I don't gamble. That is a complete fabrication." "Hannah, look at the emails," Declan urged quietly. My father slid the paper towards me. It was an email thread, seemingly from my private company account, directed to Blackwood Solutions, discussing moving funds quickly to cover the spread on the Vegas finals. "This is forged," I screamed, losing my professional composure entirely. "Dad, look at the headers. He faked this. He's lying to you, just like he lied about the Rolex, just like he lies about everything." "Enough!" my father roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the china rattled. His face was purple. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "I bring you into my company. I trust you with my life's work, and you steal from me. To cover for this degenerate's gambling?" He sneered at Liam. "Dad, please. You know me," I begged, tears finally spilling over. "I have never taken a dime from you. Look at the bank routing numbers. Look at the IP addresses. He hired someone to doctor those emails. Your brother is trying to protect the company, and you try to frame him to save your own skin?" My mother hissed, standing up. The vitriol in her eyes took my breath away. It was pure hatred. "You have always been jealous of him. Always. From the time you were little, you couldn't stand that he was special." "He is a thief, Mom!" I yelled. "Get out," my father said. His voice was no longer angry. It was dead, cold, and final. "You are fired from TED Logistics, effective immediately. If you ever set foot on company property again, I will have you arrested for embezzlement. Consider yourself lucky I'm not pressing charges for this right now. I never want to see you again." Liam grabbed my hand. His grip was tight, an anchor in a hurricane. "We're leaving, Chloe. These people are insane." As Liam pulled me toward the front door, I looked back at the dining room. My father was holding his chest, breathing heavily. My mother was rubbing Declan's back, comforting him. And Declan? Declan looked right at me over our mother's shoulder, and he smiled. A cold, victorious, chilling smirk. I was locked out of my corporate email before we even reached our car in the driveway. By Monday morning, I was a pariah. Declan had already told the board of directors that I had resigned due to severe mental health issues and a family crisis. For a week, I lay in bed, shattered. My own parents had looked at concrete evidence of my brother's crimes and chose his hastily printed, forged emails instead. They threw me away like garbage. But as the shock wore off, the grief curdled into a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. Declan thought he had won. He thought cutting off my corporate access meant I was blind. He underestimated the mediocre sister. 6 months prior, sensing that our ancient server was prone to crashing, I had quietly instituted a mirrored, encrypted cloud backup of all company financial data, linking it to a secure, private, off-site server that only I possessed the master key for. It updated every 24 hours. Declan's external IT guy hadn't known it existed. That Friday, while Liam was at work, I booted up my personal laptop and accessed the ghost drive. I didn't just want to prove he stole the $400,000. I wanted to see exactly how deep the rot went. I traced the offshore accounts. I ran reverse lookups on the LLC formation documents hidden in Delaware. And what I found made my blood run ice cold. The $400,000 wasn't just pocket money. Declan was a degenerate gambler. He had projected his own sins onto Liam. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I found a subfolder buried in his digitized personal desktop files. It was a contract with a private, predatory lending firm. Declan had taken out a $2.5 million high-risk loan. And for collateral? He had used my parents' house, the house they owned outright, the house my father planned to retire in. Declan had forged both of their signatures to sign the deed over as a guarantee. If he defaulted, and based on the late payment notices I was reading, he was already 90 days past due, the lending firm was going to foreclose on my parents' estate. My brother hadn't just stolen from the company, he had sold our parents' lives out from under them, and they had just fired the only person who could have seen the wrecking ball coming. For 3 days, I sat in my home office, with the blinds drawn, staring at the digital copies of the forged deed and the high-risk loan agreement. A part of me, the indoctrinated, conditioned daughter who had spent 30 years trying to win her parents' affection, wanted to drive straight back to that sprawling suburban house, kick the front door down, and shove the papers into my father's face. I wanted to save them. I wanted to be the hero who caught the falling knife before it severed the family legacy. But every time my hand hovered over my car keys, the memory of my mother's voice hissed in my ears. You have always been jealous of him. The memory of my father's cold, dead eyes as he fired me, treating me like a common criminal to protect his golden boy, paralyzed me. They had made their choice. They had looked at the truth and decided it was an inconvenience. If I warned them now, Declan would simply spin another lie. He would say the documents were fake, that I had hacked the lender's database, or that he was taking out the loan to save the company from my supposed embezzlement. And they would believe him? They always believed him. "We do nothing," I finally said to Liam one evening over dinner. My voice was hollow, devoid of the frantic anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. It felt as though a tether inside my chest had finally snapped. Liam, who had been quietly eating his pasta, set his fork down and looked at me carefully. "Nothing. Chloe, he leveraged their house, a multi-million-dollar estate. When that lender calls the loan in, they will lose everything," I finished for him, meeting his gaze. "My father will lose the house he built. My mother will lose her country club address, and the company will likely go into receivership to cover the corporate fraud. And we are going to sit back and watch it happen." Liam didn't argue. He just reached across the table and took my hand. "Okay, what's our first move?" My first move was securing a shark. I didn't need a family lawyer. I needed an apex predator of the corporate litigation world. I found Richard Caldwell, a ruthless, sharply dressed attorney known in downtown Denver for dismantling corporate fraudsters with surgical precision. I walked into his glass-walled office, dropped my encrypted hard drive on his mahogany desk, and told him the entire story. I showed him the forged emails Declan used to frame me, the offshore accounts, the gambling debts, and the forged deed to my parents' estate. Richard listened in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, he plugged the drive into his secure terminal and spent 20 minutes reviewing the IP logs and the forensic trail I had compiled. "Your brother is a catastrophic idiot," Richard finally said, leaning back in his leather chair. "He left digital fingerprints on everything. The forged emails to frame you originated from the IP address of his own home network. The signature on the deed doesn't even match your father's baseline motor fluidity. It's a tracing job." "Can you clear my name?" I asked, my voice tight. My father threatened to have me arrested. I need to make sure I am completely legally insulated from TED Logistics. "Oh, we are going to do much more than insulate you, Chloe," Richard smiled, and it was a terrifying, brilliant expression. "We are going to file a preemptive civil suit against TED Logistics and Declan for wrongful termination, defamation, and corporate sabotage. But we aren't going to serve them yet. We are going to wait. According to this loan agreement, Declan is 90 days past due. The lender, Apex Capital, is a predatory firm. They don't give extensions. They foreclose. We let Apex Capital drop the bomb on your parents. Once the family is in total free fall, we file our suit, subpoena the financial records legally, and lock Declan in a trap he can never lie his way out of." So the waiting game began. It was agonizing, yet strangely intoxicating. I updated my resume and quietly took a consulting job with a rival logistics firm, completely cutting contact with anyone associated with my family. My mother sent one text message during those 2 months. "Please return the spare keys to the office by Friday, or we will change the locks." I mailed them back in a blank envelope. No note, no plea for reconciliation. I was a ghost. Meanwhile, Declan's house of cards was swaying violently in the wind. Through Richard's discreet inquiries, we learned that Declan was scrambling. He had maxed out his corporate credit cards, taking clients to exorbitant dinners, desperately trying to land a whale of an account to cover his massive gambling deficits. He was sweating. He was missing meetings. The charm that had carried him through life was beginning to crack under the weight of a $2.5 million guillotine hanging over his neck. The hammer finally fell on a brisk Tuesday morning in late November. I was sitting in Richard's office, reviewing the final draft of our defamation lawsuit, when Richard's paralegal knocked on the glass door and stepped inside. "It happened," she said simply. "Apex Capital just filed the public foreclosure notice with the county clerk. Process servers are en route to the TED estate right now." I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I pictured my mother in her immaculate kitchen, arranging imported tulips, completely oblivious. I pictured my father on the golf course, bragging about his son. And then I pictured a man in a cheap suit walking up their manicured driveway, handing them a stack of legal papers that would detonate their reality. 30 minutes later, my phone began to ring. It was my father. I watched the caller ID flash on the screen, the phone vibrating violently against the glass table. It rang until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. Then my mother called. Then Sarah, Declan's wife. Within an hour, I had 14 missed calls and a barrage of frantic text messages. "Chloe, please pick up. Something terrible has happened with the house. Chloe, Dad is having chest pains. We need the company accounts unlocked. Chloe, call us immediately. There has been a massive bank error." They still didn't get it. They still thought it was an error. They still thought Declan was the victim. "Do I answer?" I asked Richard, looking at the glowing screen. "Absolutely not," Richard instructed, packing his briefcase. "You let them panic. You let them demand answers from Declan. By tomorrow morning, my process server will hand them our lawsuit. When they read the attached forensic evidence detailing exactly how Declan forged their signatures, the illusion will shatter. We will see them in court." That night, I didn't sleep. The magnitude of what was happening finally set in. The family I had known was dead. It had probably been dead for years, functioning only on the toxic fumes of Declan's narcissism and my parents' willful blindness. I felt a profound sense of grief, not for the family I was destroying, but for the family I never actually had. The end of our family didn't happen in a quiet living room. It happened under fluorescent lights, inside the cold, wood-paneled courtroom of the Denver County Courthouse. Because my father refused to accept the foreclosure, Apex Capital had pushed for an emergency injunction. At the same time, Richard maneuvered to merge the discovery phase of my wrongful termination case into the hearing, tying everything together: fraud, forged documents, and the collapse of TED Logistics. I walked in wearing a tailored navy suit, my posture rigid, my expression controlled. Liam stayed beside me, steady as always. The moment we entered, the air felt suffocating. My parents were already seated behind the defense table. My father looked broken, aged beyond recognition, his once commanding presence reduced to something fragile. My mother sat beside him, quietly crying, her composure unraveling. At the front sat Declan. He still wore his arrogance like armor, but it was cracking. When he saw me, his eyes burned with resentment. Judge Harrison wasted no time. With a sharp strike of her gavel, the hearing began. Apex Capital's legal team laid out their case first: missed payments, defaulted loans, and the estate deed used as collateral. Declan's lawyer tried to defend the signatures, but the argument collapsed almost immediately. Then Richard stepped forward, calm, precise, ruthless. He presented digital evidence, IP logs proving Declan had forged emails to frame me. Then came the expert testimony. The signatures on the deed were identical to a copied digital sample of my father's signature. Not forged by hand, but duplicated. Copied. Additionally, Richard continued, bank records show that $400,000, previously blamed on my client, was transferred into offshore gambling accounts controlled by Mr. Declan Ted. The courtroom fell silent. I turned slightly. My father stared at the screen, his face draining of color as the truth unfolded. Slowly, he looked toward Declan. "Tell me this isn't real," he whispered. Declan snapped. "It's a setup," he shouted. "She did this. She hacked everything." The gavel struck hard. "Enough," Judge Harrison said sharply. "Sit down." She reviewed the evidence, her expression cold. "This court finds overwhelming proof of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement," she declared. "The injunction is granted. These findings will be referred for criminal prosecution." The words landed like a death sentence. My mother let out a broken cry. Declan collapsed into his chair, pale and shaking. His lawyer began packing, already defeated. It was over. As Liam and I turned to leave, my father rushed forward. "Chloe, please," he said, his voice trembling. "We didn't know. He lied to us. Everything is falling apart. We need your help." I looked at him, at both of them, the people who had chosen him over me without hesitation. "You didn't know," I said quietly, "because you didn't want to know." My mother stepped forward, desperate. "We're your family." "No," I interrupted gently. "You're just people I used to know." Silence followed. I turned away. This time I didn't hesitate. The courtroom doors opened and bright sunlight poured in. I stepped outside, breathing in air that felt lighter than anything I had known before. I didn't look back. 6 months later, Declan was convicted and sentenced to federal prison. The company was liquidated. My parents lost everything, forced into a small apartment far from the life they once ruled. And for the first time in my life, I was free. They say time heals all wounds, but some bridges are meant to stay burned. I never spoke to my parents again, choosing instead to build a life founded on honesty, away from the toxic shadow of their golden child. My brother learned that you cannot gamble with the truth forever. Hard karma always collects its debts, and this time I wasn't there to pay the tab.